Does anyone know who Deval Patrick is? Who's Deval Patrick?
Governor of Massachusetts.
Governor of Massachusetts. When he ran for governor of Massachusetts, he had never held elective office previously. But he did have a political biography. What? He was the Chief Deputy Attorney General for the United States. He was appointed to that position. He wasn't elected, but it's still a relevant part of his political biography. There are rumors periodically, and I see they've just surfaced over the last couple of weeks, that Condoleezza Rice may run for office someday. Now, Rice has never held office, but she was appointed first National Security Advisor and then Secretary of State in the Bush administration. So those appointed positions are just as valid a part of their political biography as someone who was elected. If you took on a volunteer position, let's say you were the precinct captain for the Obama or for the McCain campaign in 2008. That's a volunteer position. You weren't elected to it, you weren't appointed to it, you volunteered for it. That's part of your political biography as well. So any position you've held in politics is part of your political biography, and even more importantly than your professional biographies, what you've accomplished or failed to accomplish in each of those positions is part of your political biography as well. Every piece of legislation that you've supported or opposed, every speech that you've given, every petition that you've signed, every letter to the editor that you've written, every Facebook posting on a matter of politics or public policy. This is, did you just win, Sally? Everything, it's all part of your political biography. And what that means is that before you can begin to develop a campaign message, it's of absolute critical importance to do a full inventory of your personal and professional and political biography in order to have a sense of the raw material that you can ultimately use to develop into a campaign message. What have I done? What have I experienced, for good and for bad, in my personal and professional and my political life? What's mattered to me? How have I made a difference? And long before you begin thinking, at least in terms of messaging, about the issues that you're going to run on, start out with yourself. In that inventory, that life experience, that's ultimately the first foundational aspect of your message. You have a question? No, just itching? Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Now, just a word of warning. Personal biographies are more interesting. They're more fun. It's much easier to talk about how many kids you have than what point plan you have for fixing California's water problems. And that is an important aspect of the campaign message. But it's important to remember that each of these aspects of biography are something a candidate needs to talk about. And what I tend to notice in dealing with very smart people is one of two things happens. Either a candidate tends to become overly reliant on his or her personal biography because the voters find it interesting. But the other thing, particularly in a group like this one, is we tend to over-rely on our political biography, particularly on our policy agenda. And again, issues are the most important part of a message, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But the reason I divide biography into three essential parts is because each of these essential parts is essential. If you only talk about your personal biography, if you only talk about what you've accomplished professionally, if you only talk about your goals politically, you're not presenting the voters a full picture of yourself. And so it is important, even at this early stage of message development, to mine all three areas as the first steps toward message development. Yes, and if you guys, at least for the first 5 weeks or so, can remind me who you are, that'll help.
Oh, sure,
out.
Joey.
Joey.
I have a question, and this was a debate that came up in our house because I have a roommate who's thinking about running for politics. Another roommate of mine said, well, you should probably start going to church because you cannot be a politician in this country if you're not a Christian. And so to take that example, I'm wondering, do you find, or have you found that there are a set of universal qualities that should be included in a biography? Maybe not necessarily that one, but do you think there is some validity to a statement like that? There are some...
Generally speaking, a candidate who has spent a significant amount of time living in the community in which he or she's going to run, that's considered to be a desirable biographical characteristic. And I'm guessing by the tone and nature of your question, you're talking specifically about personal biography. I'm not telling you not to go to law school because it'll prevent you from getting elected office. I'm not saying you need to go to divinity school because it will help you. Okay, bad example. Somebody else for divinity school, sorry about that. But in terms of personal biography, generally speaking, when you spend a decent amount of time in a community, that helps for reasons we'll talk about in just a moment.
Okay.
That's not to say that a newcomer can't run, but it's generally considered to be an advantage. You know, on balance, is a candidate with a spouse and family going to have some advantages? Maybe marginally. Is a candidate who frequently attends religious services going to have some advantage? Maybe with some voters, but much more important, Joey, than any of those individual characteristics, I have found at least, is framing a campaign message around the biography of who the candidate really is, rather than trying to get him or her score from any number of candidates of both parties over the years. Is candidates who try not to hide and not to misrepresent, but who try to avoid aspects of who they are fundamentally uncomfortable in their presentation to the voters. Romney has said a lot of awkward things over the course of this campaign. Now, like him or hate him, this is a very smart person. Why do I think he's saying awkward things? Because I think he is resisting talking about something that's essential to his personal biography. I'll give you another example from the other side of the aisle on a different aspect of biography. When Al Gore ran for president in 2000, he did not talk very much about the issue of climate change and global warming. A couple years after the election, phenomenal columnist by the name of Joe Klein, he writes for Time magazine. Joe Klein wrote a terrific book called Politics Lost. Politics Lost, Why Political Consultants Are Ruining American Politics. Great book, even for me. And in that book, he has dinner with some of Gore's advisors from that 2000 campaign. He's talking to them. He said, boy, Gore's all over the country now. He's talking about global warming. He's talking about climate change. He's fired up. He's excited. Why didn't he talk about this in his campaign against Bush? And the advisors told Klein with some pride. He said, well, we didn't let him. We told him not to. Because we felt that if he talked about that too frequently, it was the type of issue that could cost him a significant number of votes in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and in other Rust Belt states. Now, I have any number of friends and a very close family member who worked for Al Gore. I didn't know Gore had that kind of power. Clinton, maybe, but yeah. I have a number of friends and my younger brother, all of whom worked for Gore at various points in his career. And to a man and woman, they tell me he's fun, he's funny, he's crazy, he's silly, he's zany, and I'm like, Al Gore? And I don't doubt them. Okay, I do. I mean, I know they're not lying to me, but I just never seen that side of him. And reading this book, it occurred to me. I said, here's a guy who, at the essence of his core, what, if not the single one of the policy issues that is the highest priority to him, is the importance of fighting global warming. And he is not talking about it, did not talk about it for any political life that you don't want anyone to ever know. And then we're going to figure out how to make each of those things public one by one. And every once in a while, believe it or not, a potential candidate will resist. I'll say, that's fine, but if you're not comfortable telling me in this room, how comfortable are you going to be talking about it in a news conference, or in a debate, or in a campaign rally, in public? And sometimes a candidate will decide, you know what, it's not worth running. I don't want to hang a lantern on that problem. It's not worth putting somebody I care about through a difficult situation. In fact, I talked to the potential candidate just last week who's was getting ready to run for a fairly major office in the state. And he's about to announce that he's not running because he doesn't feel like hanging a lantern would be fair to the people whose lives he'd be affecting. Sometimes, I say, if you are 99.5% sure that this thing's not going to become public, then we don't need to hang a lantern on it. But at the very least, let's prepare a response in advance so if it does become public, we're ready to go. But by going voluntarily and proactively in our lantern hanging, you will gain credibility, you will gain trust, and you are more likely, no guarantee, to be forgiven. It's not a guarantee that anyone's going to forgive you, but you're a lot more likely to gain forgiveness if you ask for it. Yes, and your name is again?